Hey everyone, so in this video, I just wanted to talk about, I guess, a few different things. For one, I guess kind of what I've been up to and where really I've been over the first half of this year. And also talk a bit about the state of the game industry and hopefully kind of giving you a perspective from someone who was caught up in all the layoffs happening and kind of just talk about some of the hard truths about working in games for anyone just entering the game industry or artists trying to break in. I think these are important things to know. And this is definitely obviously pretty different from any of my other YouTube videos. It will probably be pretty rambly. I don't necessarily have like a specific sort of plan for this discussion. I kind of just wanted to kind of talk about a few things I've been thinking about. So I just have this time-lapse video playing just to have something in the background here. So I guess to start with, I want to talk about some of the differences between working in games versus working in film or TV. I think an obvious difference is that game animation can often be more technical. Depending on the studio you are at, you may be doing like a decent amount of implementation, which can be really fun, and working on the engine side. Animation in games can often require a lot of like iteration and testing in game and doing tweaks and then jumping back in engine and testing again. Obviously, the feeling of the gameplay is extremely important, and it really puts like a unique limitation and challenge to overcome when you're animating. And I think that's one of the more sort of like obvious differences between working in film versus working in games. But I think there's another pretty big difference between animating in games versus animating for films or TV that I don't think gets discussed enough, and actually has really nothing to do with like the animation itself and how you're animating. It's more the fact that games just take much longer to make, with pretty much the norm now for modern video games being like a minimum of 4 to 5 years for a development cycle. And that really is the minimum. They can often take much longer than that. Now, obviously, if you take into account like the entire process of making a film, you know, your story, your script, all that kind of stuff, film can often take that long, like going from the very beginning stages. But when we're specifically talking about the actual animation aspect, this is really part of post-production on a film. And it can often be, you know, just a year before release, or sometimes maybe just like 5 or 6 months before the actual release, when the animation production really starts to ramp up. Just to give like an example of that, a few years ago, I got the chance to work on a few of the creature shots for the Stephen King movie, The Boogeyman. And I was brought onto that project just like a few months before release to kind of just help bring it like across the finish line. So I think that's a pretty big difference to mention between films and games, is just how long games can take and how long, you know, an animator might be on that project before it ever gets released. With games taking, you know, at least 4 to 5 years, you could be working on a project, you know, for 5 years or more before it's ever out actually in the public. Whereas film, you can be, you know, you can hop on a film and work on it for, you know, 3 or 4 months and then have it released like pretty soon after that. And when it comes to video games, animation is required pretty much right at the beginning to really start the prototyping process. Obviously, there's just like idea phase of kind of like figuring out what the game is, but pretty early on in a game's kind of life cycle, you know, prototyping will start, actually working an engine and figuring out what the game actually is. And while the animation team might not be giant, maybe just like 1 or 2 animators on the project at that point, animation is really, you know, at that like beginning stage of the development cycle. So depending on when you join a project, you could be working on the game for, you know, years and years before it's ever released to the public. I mean, just looking at like the development cycle of something like Starfield or Cyberpunk, or, you know, the upcoming GTA 6, you know, how long that game has been in production kind of puts into perspective how long some of these like really big budget games can take. And I think this part of the conversation kind of goes back into sort of like working in the game industry and what you can expect when working in the game industry, and specifically what these like kind of development cycles might mean for you know, animators that possibly are going through, unfortunately, something like a layoff, and kind of adds on to that frustration and heartbreak of getting laid off and experiencing going through, you know, a massive layoff. And I'm sure many of you have seen the massive, you know, layoffs happening throughout the industry. It's kind of hard to miss. It seems like every time you look at the news, chances are you've probably seen all these news articles of pretty much, it seems like every major publisher or developer has announced some type of, you know, layoff within the past like 12 months or so, it seems like. And, you know, some layoffs might be, you know, 30 people. Layoffs might be, thousands of people. And layoffs definitely aren't anything new to the game industry, but I think the fact that all of these layoffs are really happening with what seems like within like a few months of each other, and in some cases like just a few weeks apart between, major studios announcing like really large layoffs. It feels like it has this sort of like snowball effect within the industry. The dam kind of broke open and like every studio is just announcing their layoffs and shrinking the workforce and trying to cut back, it seems like. So kind of like I said, it seems like pretty much like every major publisher has had some sort of layoff. It seems like every week you check the news and there's another studio kind of going through these struggles, and it kind of just continues that snowball effect. And it definitely really like magnified the situation and caused a lot of uncertainty within the game industry. And there's not really much new I can really bring into this conversation. I know there's been already like a lot of talk throughout the industry about it, specifically on the animation side. And I guess the only thing new I could really, bring to the conversation is the fact that I was affected by the layoffs happening in the industry. So I had been working for Blizzard, and many of you probably saw in the news that there were, massive layoffs throughout Activision Blizzard toward, I guess it was right around the end of January. I want to say like the last week of January. I was specifically working on their unannounced survival game, and I really can't obviously go into any detail about any of that. I can share, the articles that were posted. So unfortunately, that game was canceled as part of the big layoffs happening. And I think total there were almost around like 2,000 people laid off throughout Activision Blizzard toward the end of January. And if I remember right, the Blizzard layoffs, I think, happened maybe like a week or two or something. I remember it was like really close to like some of the Riot layoffs happening as well. So there was just like a huge kind of influx of all of these layoffs happening, and both Riot and Activision Blizzard laid off, a big number of people. I think Activision Blizzard was probably one of the higher ones, but I remember those happening pretty much around the same time, definitely within the same month, I feel like. So yeah, that whole situation was obviously pretty frustrating and pretty demoralizing. Getting laid off is never fun. And, I think on top of that, having the game canceled adds even more to that wound. And I will say, just right off the bat, I was extremely fortunate in finding another job just around like a month after being laid off. And I've joined Archetype Entertainment to work on the game Exodus, which I'm really excited about. That's where I've been over the last several months. And I think the silver lining is that I'm really enjoying where I'm working now, the project and the entire team. I definitely feel like really lucky getting to join this project. But I think obviously going through situations like that, where obviously you get laid off and then the project you're working on gets canceled, I will say I definitely lost pretty much all motivation to work on any YouTube stuff, any tutorials. I really just had like zero desire to really make anything. For one, I really couldn't think of any new content to make, and which is kind of the main reason my YouTube content kind of just died around that time, sort of the beginning of this year. And really at that time, my main focus was definitely just like looking for another job, obviously getting laid off. So every week there are lots of interviews, and definitely for me, doing interviews can be extremely stressful, and doing multiple interviews for different studios each week was definitely a lot. So that really took up kind of my entire like main focus for that time. Obviously my number one priority was finding a new job, but I will say like even after securing a job, I still just really had like zero motivation to work on any YouTube stuff. And also to kind of add to that initial like layoff that happened with Blizzard, around that same time of being laid off and having the survival game canceled, I actually found out from this article that the game I was previously working on at People Can Fly before joining Blizzard had also been canceled. So it was basically two of the last projects I've worked on both got canceled, and it was all work that I was really proud of and excited for people to eventually see one day when the games are finally released, which meant that they would probably never see the light of day, obviously with them being canceled. And I think this kind of goes back to that conversation about, the differences between games and films, and how that can really have an effect on, you know, a layoff situation, because you could be working on a game for years and years only to have it canceled, and all that work is basically like a waste. Now, it's definitely not to say like the entire experience was a waste, because it's definitely not. You get to take like everything you've learned, all these new workflows, you know, gaining more experience as an animator, learning from other animators that you haven't worked with before, and like just building onto your knowledge base, and, you know, making those connections and new friends at these studios. All that stuff is really invaluable stuff that you can obviously take with you, even if you get laid off, and even if that project you were working on got canceled. But obviously the actual, you know, animation work you were doing will likely never be seen if a project is canceled. And this can be, you know, a pretty scary thought, especially with games just taking so long to make. It is like a bit of a gamble, and it is kind of scary because, you know, our body of work as artists and animators is basically how we secure other jobs. And for myself, since 2 of the last games I worked on were canceled, really my most up-to-date reel is I guess like 6 years old now, my Dauntless reel. And I did get to work on Elder Scrolls Online between working on Dauntless and the 2 canceled games when I was at ZeniMax Online Studios. And for not having a reel with that, that's kind of just, I guess, sort of on me, and partly being a little bit lazy. And the other reason is that for one, I never, you know, created or rendered out any play blasts of my animation, which is really important to do, especially if you are working on a game like Elder Scrolls Online that has been around for years and years. And there's, you know, been so many different characters and assets already created just because it's been, you know, constantly updated. It's pretty rare that you would work on a character like completely from scratch that has, you know, no animations created for it. Chances are you're working on like a variant of a creature where, you know, a lot of the animations are reuse, and then you go in and create the animations for like the handful of new abilities for this new character, and, you know, a handful of new actions that the character has. So that also makes it a bit harder to make a reel if you haven't, you know, been able to kind of create specific, you know, renders of just your animation and nothing else, because that means you got to capture everything in-game and capture the in-game versions of all the animations, which means they're all, you know, blending in and out of some animations that you did and some animations you didn't do. So it's kind of hard to call that stuff out. Eventually, I'd like to put together a reel just because it was such a fun project to work on, and getting to work on all those really cool creatures was a ton of fun. So eventually I might, you know, spend some time finding my animations in the game just to create a reel for it. And I did get to work on some other projects between my Dauntless reel and now, like the Netflix show Daniel Spellbound and The Legend of Vox Machina, and then that Stephen King movie I mentioned. It was nice to work on something for, you know, like a few months and then have it released into the world. Definitely different than games. It was good to just get something out there. And I think that's one benefit of working on like TV or film. You'll often get like a, you know, a larger body of work faster if you are working on those types of projects. And they were all, you know, a ton of fun to work on. But myself as an animator, I definitely enjoy the game animation side the most. I love like the collaboration between the entire team. You know, you're working with all different types of departments, concept art, designers, and you're all kind of like working together to bring this game to life. And, you know, kind of the unique challenges that come with creating animation for games. So like myself, I'll always, you know, probably enjoy game animation the most because I just really like kind of the aspect of getting to kind of collaborate with everyone, and then kind of the constraints and the unique challenges that working on games where, you know, you gotta, you know, really have a understanding of like the gameplay mechanics and making sure you're kind of hitting those goals, as they're oftentimes like the most important thing. And I honestly don't know where I'm going with this or what necessarily the point is, other than to say it can definitely be frustrating at times. You know, obviously, like myself, going through layoffs and having 2 projects canceled. But this is definitely not to deter anyone in any way. I still feel like it's the best job in the world, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I definitely feel extremely lucky getting to do this for a living. But something I did notice throughout all of this happening kind of around that time is that I really needed a new way to approach mainly my like YouTube channel, and, teaching outside of my work. Because before this, it was all pretty much like 100% just motivation and kind of like inspiration. I would be like really excited for a new idea and want to start making the tutorial. I definitely just really enjoyed working on YouTube stuff. It was fun. So it was pretty easy to just jump on the computer and start recording like a quick video tutorial. I never needed to like force myself to do it in any way. But obviously with everything kind of going on at the time, it was kind of a big knock to like my motivation. And I just really didn't have any desire to work on my YouTube. Like I said, even after I knew I had secured a job at Archetype Entertainment. And I also think part of that too was that I've actually been working on a master's degree for the last year and a half. And like right during the layoff, I had my final dissertation that I really needed to finish up. So that was obviously tough, to get through that. And I knew I had to get through that to graduate. But it was definitely like a struggle to finish that. And also feel like I could get like a decent grade. So doing that and also trying to find another job was kind of taking up obviously like the majority of my time. But when I was working on the dissertation, it was definitely something where I really struggled to find motivation for that either. Same with my YouTube channel. And that came down to more discipline and obviously like knowing I had to finish this at a certain date, obviously like pushed me to get it done. So something I've learned through all of this is that sometimes you don't have that motivation. And if working on something or creating is all entirely based on that motivation, there's definitely going to be large like ebbs and flows. Because if you're like me, motivation will come in waves. And you've probably noticed like on my YouTube channel, there'll be times where I upload like a ton of content over a month or two and then just kind of not make anything for several months, which is sort of like how it's been for the most part of this year. And it's definitely awesome to see my channel has grown over 20,000 subscribers since I started. And I definitely want to keep that kind of going and growing. But that would definitely be a problem if it's all based on strictly like motivation of when I feel motivated, then I make a tutorial, because then it's going to be, like I said, that no consistency with it. And it'll just be whenever I feel like that wave. So definitely in order to have, more consistency, there has to be something that drives it beyond just like that motivation itself. And something I've learned that can really help in those times when you do want to create or you need to create and you sort of are on that sort of break of the motivation wave is that discipline. And this might be pretty obvious to some of you, but it was not something I really looked into until actually like late last year when I got into cycling. It's definitely like my new obsession right now. I've gotten into cycling and in particular criterium racing. I'm definitely brand new to it. So I'm trying to get like better and faster. And really the only way to do that is to train. And even though I enjoy cycling, like many days, I don't want to do 40 miles on the bike at 6 a.m. That's like the last thing I want to do when I wake up. But I know like obviously in order to improve, you kind of have to have that discipline to, do that thing that you really don't want to do. And that it's definitely something I've learned just throughout like getting more into cycling and fitness. And like a lot of the times it's not something you want to do. But there's definitely like a lot of benefits that come with it. So you do have that discipline to get it done. And even though it might not be like pure motivation, like I said, like sometimes that's like the last thing you want to do that early in the morning. But I know like once I get out there and it's been like 15, 20 minutes, I'm glad I'm out there and, I'm enjoying it. And the same really goes for creating and animating. It's oftentimes that initial like hump. You have to get over just that hump of starting and getting over that hill, because you may feel like you have, no motivation. And that might be true. There may be like zero motivation to start. But more often than not, I found like once you actually start, that motivation comes after. And it's not always something that has to be there. And if you're, only relying on that like motivation, like myself, then it's, things are going to come in waves and there won't be that consistency that you need. So I can't always rely strictly on motivation. Sometimes discipline needs to, come in, that thing that basically like forces me just to get started, because I know oftentimes just starting is usually like the hardest part. But once you actually get over that initial hump and you've actually just like started, then I feel like that motivation will start to kind of kick in. You have all these ideas kind of floating around in your head. Maybe you start like shooting video reference for an animation idea. and then that motivation slowly starts to build. But if, relying just strictly on motivation to actually get started, like me for the last several months, you might just like put it off and kind of forget about it. But having a bit more of that discipline just to kind of like force yourself to kind of get through the initial kind of beginning stages, I've definitely found that motivation will kind of come in pretty shortly after, once you just get past that initial hump. But yeah, I'm not really sure if that helps anybody, just like my thoughts and what I've been going over the last few months. But I think to end, I guess, a bit more on like a positive note, I wanted to take a look at Nicholas Cole. He's a concept artist at Phoenix Labs who was working on a new game for I think about 3 years, and it recently got canceled, unfortunately. That's definitely a tough thing to go through. But at least one like positive thing to come of it is that it looks like the team is able to share the work they did for the game. And this is a pretty like uncommon situation for a game to be canceled, and the company also allows the artists to share their work. And it's really awesome to see, because like I said, what the artists actually create is so important for finding other work. It's basically their resume, and it goes beyond just the name of the company that you work for. It's, what you created when working at that company. So this is pretty rare to see. Most times games that are canceled get kind of locked in that vault, partly because like possibly that company may want to revisit it at some form or another, years down the line. So they don't want to kind of just release everything and all the artwork for it and let people share their, animation reels from it. If they feel like maybe some years down the line, they don't want to kind of let that IP go to waste. So seeing this is really cool. I would definitely recommend checking out his Twitter. He's been posting a lot of really awesome artwork from it. Definitely sad to see this game canceled because it looks really cool. Obviously has a really unique and fun art style, and looks like a ton of passion went into this. Hopefully more studios will allow this game gets canceled, allowing some of the artists, to at least be able to share some of their work out into the world. But you can see like these really cool and fun characters that he created. It looks like a really just awesome and vibrant world with some really unique characters. And you can see even some of the like animation examples here that they were able to do, some of the tests they were able to do on these characters. So this is really cool to see that this is actually at least out into the world, and he's able to share this with everybody. So yeah, I think that's it for this video. Not really sure if it was helpful at all. Kind of just rambling here. I guess if nothing else, maybe kind of just give an update on kind of the last several months and kind of part of the reasons why my channel has been pretty dead for a while. But yeah, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed it, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.